this information. How he does it, I don't know.
Okay. Right. So, what's your review of the revelations that have been made so far vis-a-vis the prosecution that has commenced?
Yes, thank you very much, Samson. The matter is one that is of great interest to us at Imani, some of the other research-focused governance think tanks, certainly IDEG and others, from different respects. And when your producer reached out, even though I had a flight, I thought this was so important to us that I would join. What I'm going to do is present to you a framework for analysis that, in my view, will help narrow down some of the discussions. So we start off with, a very important element of the situation, which is the due process rights of Mr. Adu-Boahene or Mr. Kwabena Adu-Boahene. And those due process rights are not something we will quibble with. We will not seek to trivialize his due process rights. So his rights to counsel, to a fair hearing, presumption of innocence, those are all important. And in the conversations, there's been a lot of effort to emphasize his due process rights. That notwithstanding, we also have to remember that Mr. Adu-Boahene is a very powerful and apparently wealthy man. Powerful in the sense that he ran one of the 3 core intelligence agencies, and I will explain what that means in a second, what we mean by core intelligence agencies. He has extensive connections across the entire security infrastructure of the country. He has extensive connections across the government because the nature and the role of national security means that you interface with a wide range of activities. And as Dr. Akpete has said, there is considerable discretion in some of the ways in which they are allowed to interface with different parts of the national life. We also now know that he's a very wealthy person, and I'll come to that at the very end of my presentation. One of the problems of any justice system anywhere in the world is that the rich and powerful, if you're not extremely careful, can easily evade the normal accountability through the justice system that the rest of us are subject to. And so we are also equally concerned as a society that justice is seen to be done when rich and powerful people are concerned because of the fear of justice capture. So we have to balance his due process rights with the inherent interest and right of the public to be assured, to build public confidence in the process, and to be assured that notwithstanding his power and his wealth, the system can deal with him. Because otherwise, he has the best of lawyers, he has the best of witnesses. There's a whole range of facilities available to him that's not available to ordinary people. On the same score, we have in this country a national priority of anti-corruption that has been endorsed by the courts, who through various rulings and their jurisprudence, such as coining terms such as create, loot, and share, and the like, have made it very clear to us that in our country, corruption and perceived corruption are very critical for our national life. So this current administration came into office riding on the back of anti-corruption in the form of a policy called oral, which is very, very critical to, in their view, to the sustenance of our democracy. So these are important, national interests that we are balancing. The due process rights of an individual, the communal and the public rights to be, to see that corruption is being tackled and that justice is being done. And no matter how rich and powerful you are, that you cannot evade justice. So these are the important dynamics within which we operate in. And it's not sensible, in my view, nor rational, to elevate one above the other. These interests must be balanced. The due process rights of the individual with our communal interest in anti-corruption and in justice being seen to be done, no matter who is involved, no matter how powerful they are. The second critical point that I think we ought to be emphasized is that the national security system is not the Wild West. The national security system in Ghana is very structured. As you know, being a very prominent lawyer in this country yourself, there are multiple laws that govern how each of the agencies operate and how they work together. So the Security and Intelligence Services Act 2020 and other acts make it very clear that the governing body of all the intelligence services in the country is the National Security Council. Every single intelligence agency in this country is not a law unto themselves. They report to the National Security Council, which is the apex. And within that National Security Council, there's a secretariat which ensures the day-to-day function of the intelligence services and their supervision. Critical word, supervision. It's also very important to recognize that in addition to that, the three core agencies, which is the Research Department, the National Signals Bureau, which used to be the Bureau of National Communications, that the person of interest, Mr. Adu-Boahene, used to oversee, and the National Intelligence Bureau, which used to be the BNI, or the Bureau of National Intelligence. These three core agencies all report to the Minister of National Security. And in the Act, the Minister has very clear rules. And in the Enabling Act of the National Signals Bureau in particular, the Minister has rules as well. The National Security Coordinator, who has been mentioned in this saga, operates on a leash entirely held by the Minister. He cannot do anything that is not authorized to be done by the Minister. And all operational funds are controlled by the Minister. This is explicit in the law. So there isn't any kind of provision of financial discretion given to the National Security Coordinator. Those are very important points to make. I've tried in a very crude manner to summarize the national security architecture as I've described it. So you have at the apex of it the National Security Council and Secretariat, underneath it the three core agencies, one of which Mr. Adu-Boahene ran, and which therefore marks him out to be a very important and prominent individual. And then the core agencies interact with what I will call the extended security ecosystem, which include the investigative agencies, your YOCO, FICs, and the like, and also the security services, which include the army, the police, to some extent, the immigration service, customs, national fire service, etc. So in that whole architecture, and if you add the human security dimension, then we're also talking about the emergency services, and therefore the likes of NADMO and the rest are all important. We've also decentralized the process to the point where we have regional and district councils, which brings in the municipal authorities. Why have I gone to the trouble of describing all of this? I want to try and explain that unless you operated within the ambit of law and you were subject to the clear structures of those laws, there will be chaos, given the extent of the national security system we have. You have National Fire Service people claiming that because they are also part of national security somehow, they can do whatever they want. They can buy fire tenders without procurement rules, etc., which will not be allowed. Even the national security services must obey the general laws that are in place, such as public financial management, such as national procurement laws, except to the extent that, to some degree, the way in which information about them is put in public is classified on a need-to-know basis. And I will explain in a minute how that does not necessarily mean that we are blind to the activities. The NSB, which is the agency that was run by the person of interest in this conversation, it's itself, as I've explained, subject to the exact same regime as the rest of the intelligence services. And its functions and its supervising body be the National Security Council, which is chaired by the president, by the way. And this is such a critical matter, and I'll come to that in a minute. But the president chairs it. There are a number of ministers who must be members of the National Security Council, including Minister of Defense, Foreign Affairs, Interior, etc. There's a National Security Committee, which is a smaller subset of that council. And on top of that, there are other functional committees which interface with the investigative services, etc. Everyone, including the Chief of Defense Intelligence and the rest, must come to that committee and justify their activities. And that governance is critical. Disclosure is allowed in matters such as this for investigation purposes as well. So, for instance, a person of interest has said that he did not want to disclose information to the Attorney General. In his own Enabling Act, that provision is made that if the Minister of National Security, who at this point in time is the Honorable Muntaka, Minister of Interior, because he's been given additional responsibilities, he has the right to authorize someone who, because of the fact that he's a former member of the National Security Services and therefore is still subject to an oath of secrecy, he has the right to authorize him to release information. So all of those matters have to be very clearly put out. It's not as if national security is some jungle, you can do whatever you want and things like that. Every single activity of national security is regulated by law, and that law reins in what they can do. Secondly, or even more crucially, national security is not a closed book. The Auditor General audits the accounts and is supposed to audit the accounts. A word there, we have seen so many other abuses, including one that I'll cite very shortly, where the Auditor General was unable to pinpoint until there were further investigations, and typically until after the government change. So even though the Auditor General has access to these accounts, typically because of the way in which the specialized nature of the service interacts with the specialized knowledge of our auditors, there are instances where they overlook. And that's the case across the country. That's why we have oral. Otherwise, if Auditor General will spot and address all the matters that ORA is supposed to deal with, but there are forensic matters that for some reason we've not been able to build capacity within our auditing agencies to be able to handle. But the fact that the Auditor General is supposed to have access to all the accounts, including classified accounts, you know what in America is called black budgets, that fact is very, very crucial because it tells you that you cannot simply spend money how you want. And I'll come to that in a minute. The Public Financial Management Act applies and has various ways in which money is disbursed and authorized through spending officers in the ministry. Certain matters cannot be handled by the chief spending officer alone. It must be done in conjunction with the auditing system, the internal audit agency, staff that are placed there, supposedly under clearance. Parliament has oversight. And if you want to evade parliamentary accountability, you need a warrant of some kind signed by the Speaker or alternatively by the National Security Council. And if there's a dispute, it must go to the Supreme Court. So the assumption that civilian oversight of the Security Service is not there is also not correct. Parliament has full oversight to get this information. And part of that goes through the Public Accounts Committee. Right. The fact that the Public Accounts Committee has the capability to, or the right to receive reports about all operations of national security itself tells us that the law did not assume a vacuum. These are critical points. Now, the NSB's own law also makes the same accommodation for the financial provisions and talks about the fact that all their books and records and the like of it will be subject to the Auditor General. The Council, through the Minister, at the end of the financial year, will submit these matters to the Auditor General for audit, and the report will be shared with Parliament, etc., etc., etc. So these are all very critical matters. On top of that, in this country, we've had an exact same incident. Monies meant for the purchase of spyware apparently diverted. People have gone through the court and been successfully prosecuted and jailed in this very country. Exact same situation. The money was designated for spending in the area of spyware. Somehow the spyware was not purchased. Somehow, because the spyware was not purchased, it was deemed that the money had been stolen. These people were prosecuted in court, not necessarily under the same charges, I think, under financial laws, but I think, as I recall it, some of the charges were identical, and these people were found guilty, meaning that the courts have already given us enough jurisprudence, enough case law to understand that you cannot, as a national security, divert funds to do other things in the way that you seek.
Coincidentally, the cost involved in that earlier one was like the same one.
$4 million, and this is $7 million.
$8 million was supposed to be the actual figure. $4 million was the money that had gone out.
True. But in this case, I'm talking of the funds that are missing.
That's right.
Higher in this case than in that one.
That's right.
So the situation is that this is a problem that's a solved problem all over the world. It's a solved problem. There's nothing complicated about how you handle black budgets. There are black ops operations that are covered in nature, some of which border on criminality if they were not authorized. If they were not authorized, however, then they become rogue operations. So essentially, the way it works is if the CIA wants to render you, let's give you a very classic example in the Ghana context. Let's say one of the reasons why we've not had a terrorist incident in this country for so long is because the national security has been bribing terrorist agencies or organizations in Burkina Faso or Mali. Let's say that was the case. I'm giving a scenario, purely hypothetical scenario. And the way that they've been procuring this peace was bribing terrorist bosses in Mali, Niger, and elsewhere. Of course, that money will not be described in those terms in reports that are not classified. So you and I will not know. But three things will happen. One of it is that the National Security Council will definitely be briefed. You cannot go and bribe terrorist officers unless, or terrorist actors, unless you are informing the president of the country in his capacity as chair of the National Security Council, and you have an authorization to do so. Else, you could be complicit yourself in terrorism. Now, in those scenarios, the fact that it's a black op doesn't mean it's an unauthorized black op. And the fact that you cannot disclose in public doesn't mean that certain important people in this country, like the chairperson and the ranking member of the Defense and Interior Committee, cannot be brought before the security intelligence agencies and given access to information, even if they don't have the right of copy and things like that. So you must distinguish between black ops and unauthorized rogue ops. If the suggestion that is being made by the person of interest is that we have unauthorized ops, but his superiors were aware of it within the fraternity of the National Security Service alone, but not the National Security Council, then he's simply making things harder for other national security officers who may still be serving. That may be true, but that has nothing to do with the prosecution. The prosecution, in fact, must go on to unravel any unauthorized rogue operations and bring that under the ambit of the law. Because if you are not allowed to go and do activities that you don't bring the president about. On top of that, remember that we've had a handing over. Handing over notes were delivered. In the period, if there were matters that only the president of the republic knew, which in my view, there's no way you can do any operation in this country, given the structure of our laws, that the president of the country will not know. The outgoing president will know and will have briefed the incoming president. There will be records to enable accountability. Do you think that this prosecution will be ongoing if the current president is not completely confident that these matters were not authorized? You think his attorney general has not briefed him? He's not sought the advice of his own National Security Council actors? And they've not discussed it with the former president, if need be, because if there was something that overlapped with briefings that they received in handing over notes. So we have to remember that unauthorized ops are not legal. They cannot be conducted in our republic, and they can certainly not be funded. If they are authorized ops, then notwithstanding the fact that they are covert ops or they are black ops, using the idiom in the United States, they will still be recorded, and they will still be matters that are subject to the jurisdiction of the National Security Council. So this is the most critical element of it. On top of it, in our national security strategy, the sweet spot, the high impact, high probability context, because we have some threats and risks in the country that are low impact and low probability. So the most critical threats and risks we manage, corruption is one of them. So the national security itself knows that corruption is a critical problem, and therefore they will set up their own systems appropriately to manage this. And therefore, if there was a sense that corruption was undermining national security itself, let me give you an example. Let's assume that just for the moment of this conversation, that every accusation that has been made against Mr. Adu-Boahene is correct. What that means is that this is one of the biggest breaches of national security in our history. It means that the people who run the three core agencies of national security can literally be blackmailed, because what that will mean is, if, for instance, the assumption of stealing is correct and somebody else knew it because they had done, let's say, an investigative journalist, they had looked at this private company, done some of their background checks, got some sources, and then identified that this is potentially unauthorized or this is being used for stealing. I'm just saying this hypothetically. They can blackmail the national security chief concerned, and that will undermine our national intelligence.
Quickly get to this for us. Your next slide. In your slide, you say that close examination of the claims do not hold water. Get to the jugular for us.
I'm ending on that point. So, number one, we had very specific budgets for very specific operations, because our national budgeting framework does not allow you to just spend money anyhow. Money authorized by Parliament for specific actions, even if it's a classified budget, those monies must be traced to their intended outcomes. We've decided that we want to buy spyware in this country because it's necessary to spy on people. If that is necessary to spy on people, because some of them are terrorists, some of them are criminals, etc., and we've decided to buy it and we've allocated $7 million, you cannot allocate $1.something million to the company, refuse to pay the rest, and so therefore the country is denied the benefit of the transaction, and for over 4 years claim to have diverted the money to other purposes without any trail. That would not be allowed in our national financial laws. So that is not something we can even discuss. It's not a reasonable explanation to give. The second point is that some of the projects that he's mentioned are very well-known projects. Operation Calm Life, for instance, is a very well-known operation that was run in this country by the military. Operation Conquered First was run by the police service. There's a lot of information about this. Alpha, which is the CCTV complex, those white poles that you see all around the country, is about $230 million project where we borrow money from the Chinese Exim Bank, we borrow money from Barclays, we put it all together. We bought a lot of these CCTV cameras and wired them all together. If you claim that somehow these projects involve the diversion of money, because all of these projects have their own budgets, and then somehow you are aware of the diversions of these monies, that means that you are opening a new front. You are suggesting that if you are not giving special treatment, you will blow the cover of these operations generally. It cannot be that monies that were supposed to be given for IIC was diverted to these operations, because that's not how it is done. And if that was the case, as in an authorized reassignment of the budget, the person who will do it will be the Minister of Finance, acting through the President, quietly in the National Security Councils, but will have the records. So the Attorney General of the Republic, who has access to all of this and is at the ear of the President, will not be blind to these matters. And so what I think is happening is very clear. we have someone who has been admitted, has a company that has dealings in multiple industries. One of these companies called Advantage Solutions. It builds mast and other infrastructure for telecom companies. The owner of it was a national, or the lead shareholder, ultimately an ultimate beneficiary, was the chief of the very intelligence agencies that is responsible for communications in this country and can make pronouncements about security breaches and spectrum breaches of other telecom companies. Can we run a country where people who run national intelligence services? Let me give you a very simple analogy that will bring this home to you. Literally, is the IGP running his own private security companies in this country, or the head of the armed forces, the CDS, running his own private security companies in this country. Can we allow this in any serious country? That you have a national security boss, he's sitting there, he's a serving officer, he has companies that have investments all over the country, has shareholding claims, I mean, he has access to classified information. Can he compete fairly with his competitors in the market? This is not something we can allow. So I'm not sure we want to go down this road.
Okay.
But very clearly, this is a situation that constitutes a massive breach of our national security system, and we must not take it lightly at all.